So we're continuing in your history book, U.S. History, chapter 24, and we went through the Great Depression. We're going on to the third section that had to do with the New Deal of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. FDR was president during this time, and he was bringing in the New Deal with a lot of changes, a lot of new regulations where the government was becoming more active in with the businesses and in the times of the Depression with American people. So we just went over the banking system and how the banking system now is being regulated, and how he brought in the FDIC, the insurance for the bank. And now we're going into the agriculture, because this time, of course, the farmers were the greatest hit by the Depression, the Great Depression during this time. And the Agriculture Adjustment Act, May 1933, would regulate the agriculture and business that FDR would put forth so that he could regulate the farmers. So to increase the prices for the products, he paid the farmers not to plant crops or to butcher their livestock. So he paid the farmers not to plant. That was a big deal, huh? And many Americans became upset because this was a time of, we're in the Depression with hunger and depression. And so he's paying the farmers not to farm. It says farmers holiday. Now the Agricultural Adjustment, AAA back then, was put forth that paid the farmers penalty, actually paid them for goods and to destroy their surpluses. Basically, they even destroyed some of their surplus crops and food at this time. Not a good time. So America did not have plenty of food. So it was kind of an Agricultural Adjustment Act, probably not the best thing. National Recovery Adjustment was the NRA. So not NRA the way we see the National Rifle Association. It's the National Recovery Adjustment of 1933. So it was put forth by the New Deal of FDR to control wages and prices and to limit the competition in business. So basically come in and make sure the businesses are paying these wages and these prices. And it also encouraged labor union organizations to be involved in all of this and supported the labor unions. And in the process of putting forth the National Recovery Adjustment, many factories just had to close down. They couldn't deal with it all. As with the competition and the wages and the prices and all, the factories just said, well, we can't afford it. We're just shutting down. So a lot of them did, because they couldn't make a profit anymore. So as the government came in to control the prices and wages. And this actually hurt and prolonged the depression in the economy by the National Recovery Adjustment, trying to control businesses, right? A lot of them went out of business. And the government welfare at this time is called the FERA, F-E-R-A. And this was direct relief by the government. The government came in to provide financial relief of the unemployed, and establishing this would release large amounts of taxpayers' money to state and local. This taxpayers' money would be to directly relief of the unemployed. Okay? Well, in the midst of this whole thing, the money passed through, a lot of people would become dependent on getting their money, right, from the government. So this would be a direct type of relief instead of indirect. And it was headed by FDR's friend and advisor. His name was Henry Hopkins. And set forth, FERA, F-E-R-A, sent $9 billion aside for federal welfare at this point. And this also would discourage self-reliance and individual initiative. So it's basically discouraging them and putting them independent on what the government will give you the money, but you have to do this. Isn't that the way it goes? So the people did become dependent on the government welfare at this time. So here's, how is Roosevelt playing his cards? So FERA, F-E-R-A, was established on May 22nd, 1933. And it says, yes, it's still known for welfare. Okay, let's go ahead. Here's some pictures there too, but let's go ahead next. Great job programs. Now this is indirect relief because basically the government's going to create jobs for people, so they can still help themselves and go to work, right? In 1933, federal jobs for unemployment were established. These started with the TVA, was the Tennessee Valley Authority of 1933. And this is to erect dams and hydroelectric plants on the Tennessee River. Here's some pictures. To basically, again, get involved in these dams that were so needed, and the government coming in, building them, and providing jobs for people in the building and industry, and onto engineering, and just labor. So, and to build transmission lines. So giving this would be the electric cost of low cost to electric. The electricity would be given to farms, the communities, and industries. It also provided for some fertilizer production too. I don't know about that. And flood control and reforestation, all these things. And so this was very far-reaching for the New Deal for restoration. So these went on for huge dams for power to prevent floods and irrigation and river navigation. So these things were indirect relief in providing for employment. And many were employed by these, especially starting with the Tennessee Valley Authority, which you need to know, TVA. That's where government came in to make jobs through building dams. New Deal organizations, okay. New Deal organizations, we have the CCC, Civilian Conservation Corps, that's still around, the Conservation Corps. Now it's like Youth Conservation Corps, but CCC in 1933 put thousands of young men to work on conservation projects. And then there was the PWA, Public Works Administration, in 1933, and the WPA, the Works Progress Administration, of 1935. And they started making jobs happen on the construction of highways and bridges and parks and sewers and schools and hospitals and public buildings. All of these things were put forth by the Public Government Works program to make jobs happen, to open jobs to people. The NYA was the National Youth Administration, and this was for high school and college students that would provide them with part-time employment to complete school. I actually did work back when, for the Conservation Corps and for the National Youth Administration when I was in high school. So basically giving young people work experience at this time, and the government coming in and providing for this too. So here we have Camp Roosevelt, we have the NYI workshops here, women here in the midst. Here we have the New Deal program, creating jobs by having people build highways, bridges, tunnels, and other public works, it says. U.S. Work Program. Just think WPI, Works Progress Administration, work program. Think of work. And on to during all of this, so we're going to change our tone a little bit here, but we have the repeal of Prohibition. So we have the 21st Amendment. Remember, the 20th Amendment was the lame duck of the lame duck administration that we talked about before, is that period of time changing them when the president takes control, the new president. Now we have the 21st Amendment, and this is on the 18th Amendment was on prohibition, that it prohibited alcohol, the sale of alcohol, and bars shut down and such. Well, during FDR, in order to make more money, he raised by repealing the prohibition of alcohol, and he instituted a liquor tax. He said, well, what it will do is we'll let them have their beer and alcohol and we'll tax it. And so December of 1933, the 21st Amendment legalized the sale of alcohol, the beer and alcohol, all liquor. And it repealed the 18th Amendment. This was the only repealing of the only amendment that was actually repealed ever was the 18th Amendment on alcohol. So now, of course, you can buy alcohol anywhere, right? So before the 18th Amendment was passed, they could not, and so they would have a lot of illegal making of alcohol and drinking of alcohol, and now they made it legal. So the consumption of alcohol did increase during this time, and of course the number of alcoholics would increase drastically as it has today. So it also had an increase in drug addiction, psychiatric conditions, divorce rates, and all these things that come along with alcoholism. And it caused a lot of family instability on top of it. But basically using alcohol as being addicted to it would cause lots of problems. But anyway, just to know that the 21st Amendment brought a repeal of prohibition, and that now alcohol would be legal. FDR's foreign affairs. So he recognized communist Russia in November of 1933. So in 1917, there was a huge rebellion in Russia called the Bolshevik Revolt. And during this time, Lenin and Stalin took over. Now we have Stalin as a dictator running the Soviet Union, right? And so everyone's like, well, this is communism. Well, FDR wanted to resume trade with the Soviets, and so he recognized them as communist Russia. So he recognized the communist government of USSR. So in the midst, so FDR and the Soviet Union, and this is the foreign policy now, for the first time in 16 years, the Soviet Union and the United States would exchange diplomatic ties. So he would actually, try to become friends with the USSR, Russia, Soviet Union at that time, not totally knowing what everything's going on there and all the millions of people that were being starved to death and millions of people that were being killed during the Bolshevik revolt and on, in United States. So it wasn't the best thing, right? So Russians then were allowed to acquire loans and technology from the United States, which they did so. So that was the down thing, is now Stalin could say, okay, we want to know more about, why don't you loan us some money and we're going to learn more about your technologies, and only so that they could develop military strength for the future against us, right? So of course a dictator wants to do that at all times, use any way they can to get information and money to support their dictatorship, which indeed Stalin was a communist dictator. Here's pictures of Stalin and FDR. FDR also had a good neighbor policy. Well, this had been going on for presidents in the past. And so from the United States and Latin American countries, he said, I would dedicate this nation to the policy of the good neighbor. So he repealed the Platt Amendment of 1934 and surrendered the right to intervene in Cuba's internal affairs. So this is, I don't know if this is the best thing, because Cuba then would become a communist nation. But he surrendered Cuba and said, okay, Cuba, you can take care of yourself. Maybe they weren't exactly ready for that, In fact, we know what happened back when Castro would take over and Cuba would become communist. So, but anyway, he surrendered the right to intervene. America, he said, could not intervene in Cuba anymore. But he did still was allowed to Guantanamo Bay as a naval base in Cuba, even though despite, him surrendering this right in Cuba. So just think, he kept the good neighbor policy, and promised trade to Latin America, South America and Central America, and then dissolved the Platt Amendment. Platt Amendment has to do with Cuba. Just remember that we were trying to help the Cuban government, and we withdrew from that. Okay. Here's some pictures of that. So, opposition to the New Deal. Of course, there would be opposition, but the weird thing, it's from both sides, the left and the right side. The left, the far left and the far right would both look at FDR in different ways. So the liberals, basically, on the left, liberals, they thought that the New Deal didn't do enough. We need to do more. We need to redistribute the nation's wealth. We need to take away the money from the wealthy and give it to the poor. So we need to take over in this situation. So they felt like we weren't doing enough, and that would lead, of course, to communism. So the New Deal had opposition for that too. The liberal Democrat, in fact, his name was Senator Huey Kingfish Long, and he was of Louisiana, and he wanted heavy state taxes because he wanted to take taxes from the wealthy, from the middle class, and redistribute the wealth to the poor and make everyone, all equal in that sense. Very communistic, very socialistic. But the conservatives thought the New Deal was too socialistic. They had basically had the idea of Herbert Hoover, who the president before, who wanted little government intervention. And so they thought that a New Deal was giving too much power over business and industry, and it would take away the free enterprise system and take away the individual's initiative would be very much reduced, basically saying individuals would not be cared for, have initiative in their care, not in that point. I would call that individual freedom would be taken away. And this would expand the federal bureaucracy, basically how to expand. Also the cost of the New Deal was humongous, and the national debt would soar because the cost would cost so much for all these programs that he brought past. And despite all of this, unemployment remained a problem. It would still be there. Even though all these programs, we still would have a lot of unemployment, 17% unemployment, all the way through, despite all the programs of the New Deal. Here's a picture. I am determined that under the Constitution, these things shall be done. And then he crashes through the Constitution. And this is Huey Long of Louisiana. He believed the New Deal did not do enough. So he was a promoter of strong legislation, probably more to the communist. The Supreme Court Act of 1935. Well, the Supreme Court, of course, was challenging many of the New Deal legislation. It'd have to go through the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court called the Agriculture Adjustment Act for the farmers unconstitutional. And then the National Recovery Act, they declared that unconstitutional too. So as it was passed by Congress, basically executive, the cabinet, and on to FDR, the president, had proposed these bills. They went through Congress, passing through Congress, but they got to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court started rejecting them. And so, of course, FDR's thinking, what? I need to get some different judges on the Supreme Court. We'll find out what he did. He would try to pack the Supreme Court and take some of the judges that he didn't like, that were getting too old, tried to make them retire from the Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court struck down several as unconstitutional, and that kind of set aside exactly what the New Deal was going to do in certain areas. the second New Deal. Okay, the beginning of the second New Deal. We had the first New Deal up to now. All that I went over was the first New Deal. Now we have the second New Deal, and this had to do with Social Security, which we have today. So on June 1935, the second New Deal put in action the Social Security Act of 1935. Very important because we have Social Security Act today. The government now would fund for unemployment and old age insurance. So, and this would be financed by taxes. The employees' wages and employees' payrolls are all had this taken out of their wages, or taken out on them as tax. And so they'd have to pay these taxes. And then when they retired, they would receive the benefits of being retired to get their Social Security. So this is what we do even today. So also this would have also provide relief for the blind and the crippled and all of that. So at first it was set for Social Security Act of 1935 was set aside for voluntary. You could actually, put your money aside for old age, and but then it became this huge, enormous agency, the Social Security Agency, that everyone would be required now to be taxed for unemployment and old age, Social Security. And this would transfer vast amounts of money to welfare programs. So because they're taking so much money out, for Social Security, they're using this money for welfare, and later on going to be giving out this money again for those who have put in, supposedly. Now we're finding out that hopefully in the future, Social Security may go bankrupt and not be able to do this. I don't know. When I say that, how are we going to be able to sustain the vast amounts that are giving out? We'll see what the future holds. But this is the Social Security Act of 1935. So more security for American families. They said a monthly check to you. Here's your Social Security numbers. So it says join the march to old age security. That's what they called it in the beginning. Social Security. On to we're talking about the second New Deal now. On to the National Labor Relations Act. We're talking about labor unions now. And so he established the National Labor Relations Board, and this would protect the rights of labor unions. So it would also mediate disputes between labor unions in the businesses, and it would give labor unions a right for collective bargaining. So it was just a big support of labor unions. So and that basically it was designed to monitor unfair management practices and act as an arbitrator between management and unions. So here's the National Labor. So FDR would definitely support the labor unions. So on to the Supreme Court, FDR's court packing. Remember I told you about court packing? So you have to know, what's that mean? So in 1937, after FDR's second term, he wanted the power to name new Supreme Court justices, the judges on the Supreme Court. So every member at that time that would be over 70 years old would have mandatory retirement. He said, and there were a lot of them that were older on the Supreme Court, just that for lifetime, right? And so he wanted to get rid of some of these guys that he felt were too old. So in doing this, he didn't make a lot of good friends. Let's just say that. So he said the Supreme Court needed younger, more vigorous men. And to get rid of you had to be mandatory retirement when you turned 70. And so he falsely charged the Supreme Court of being behind in their work because they were too old. At that time, 15 of the judges were over 70 years old. So he wanted to get rid of them so he could put in new judges that would support his New Deal, right? So FDR's court packing scheme was to gain pro-New Deal majority in the Supreme Court. He just wanted pro-New Deal justices. So this reaction at first, the Congress refused it, said, what is he doing now? But gradually the Supreme Court looked more favorable on the New Deal, and FDR did make 8 appointments due to deaths and retirements. So some of them did die, some of them did retire, but he did make new appointments anyway. But here's this cartoon here basically says, yes, 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 we all vote yes, that he was going to pack the court with all of his guys. It says, because the Supreme Court had overturned some of FDR's plans, he wanted to change the Supreme Court to help his own goals. And FDR wanted the number of judges changed from 9 to 15. He wanted to pack the court with those judges that were in support of him. So, because here it says there was great opposition to this idea because FDR was changing the Constitution in this way. And so ending up, they were very upset with his court packing scandal. They called it a scandal here, court packing scandal. Back to the role of labor, the labor unions. The labor unions advanced in the New Deal. John L. Lewis here, he's with the United Mine Workers. He organized now what's called the CIO, the Committee for Industrial Organizations for unskilled and skilled laborers. And then he united with the other labor force was the AFL, the American Federation of Labor. They were mainly skilled laborers. And they united together, then they split in 1938. And the Congress of Industrial Organization of the steel industry, automobile industry, rubber industry, textile industry, and the CIO in 1940 had 2.65 million members. So this is a huge deal. With the New Deal, the role of labor became very important with all of these labor union organizations. And now we still have the AFL and the CIO coming together. Oh, back there was a picture of Eleanor Roosevelt supporting the labor unions. So the CIO unions, they were organized sit-down strikes now, and they would basically, before they would be outside, they picket outside of the company or the business, they'd picket outside and they refused to work. But now they started barricading themselves on the inside. And so this would be hard for the police to come in and break the strike, and it often led to violence and destruction of property. And the employers usually feared that the destruction, because they'd have expensive machinery in their factories. And if the laborers would strike inside and cause violence to happen, probably destroy a lot of their property and their machinery and their stuff. And so a lot of times the businesses would give in right away because they didn't want their place to be a total wreck, So in General Motors in 1936, with the CIO had a strike, and the U.S. Steel had a strike in 1937. Both of them were settled in the midst, but you can admit it was on the verge. Each one was on the verge of violence as they had the strikes, the sit-down strikes inside. And there were many other labor strikes. There are many problems, even between the AFL and CIO unions, that they had problems among themselves too. And many people, citizens, were very appalled at the violence and opposition of the rights of those who did not wish to. If you didn't join the union, you were ostracized, and violence a lot of times against those that did not join the union. They were called scabs, in fact. So, FDR's third term, he's the first president that would actually go for a third term. and he broke the precedent that was established by the President George Washington. He said the president should only could go 2 terms. Well, he was seeking a 3rd term. And so, but the country at that time felt that they couldn't forfeit the value of Roosevelt's experience, and thought, especially because the whole world was on the brink of war, of World War II. And so they thought, we need to keep FDR as president. So he would run for 2 more successive terms in office. So really 4 terms, although he did die in the 4th term. But he'd be the only president that would serve a 3rd and 4th term, a 3rd term. So now we have it settled as only 2 terms. So here it says, I'm against the 3rd term. Washington wouldn't do it, Grant couldn't do it, and Roosevelt shouldn't do it, 3rd term. But he did. He was inaugurated for, it says, I want you, FDR, stay and finish the job. Understanding the Depression years. So let's think. Yes, during the Depression years, it was a hard time. So there was a lot of things going on for the government to intervene. There would be steps towards socialism, and it would expand the power over American businesses and industry and agriculture, the government power. New York Senator Robert Wagner, who's a socialist, said, I do not think we will ever have industry in order until we have a nationally planned economy. He basically thought the government needs to plan the whole economy and control it. Well, this would threaten American tradition of free enterprise for sure. And it would be very costly and very inefficient. In 1939, for 6 years, government job programs were put on and regulation of deficit spending, and 9 million workers would still be unemployed. Despite what that's saying is, despite all of this, the 6 years, we still have unemployment, right? The New Deal did little to really help the economy. In fact, in many ways, it prolonged the Depression, and it laid the foundation for social welfare state for people to be dependent on the government and not work. So, and then many Americans indeed became dependent on the government. So you got to understand these years, what happened back then, and to look at FDR's New Deal under the light of 2 things. First, it was opportunity time as being in depression for the government to take control. Another would be when the government took control, it would allow people to be dependent on the government and not have initiative and freedom. It would actually limit American freedom. But anyway, so understanding these Depression years. So we're done with this, I guess, done with this section now, and we'll go on to the next chapter, which will be FDR during a world war that started World War II, and how we got involved in World War II.